Okay, we're going to try this. It's a new technology. I'm trying, not technology, new software program. I'm trying to see if this works out for recording our class. That'll let you see the PowerPoint and see me at the same time. My goal today is to cover about an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes worth of material. And then from here, you'll have discussion posts to go along with the questions that we're doing here. So if you haven't used Advanced 360 before, you need to familiarize yourself with it. There'll be a discussion post that pops up and a lesson that pops up that I'll schedule once this is done being recorded, and then you'll be able to go in and do that there. So with that said, your discussion posts should be between 250 and 300 words in total length for when you're done, and there will be at least 2, possibly 3 discussion posts. It'd probably be 2, honestly. I plan on having this up by tomorrow morning. Not that you know what day it is right now. It's Thursday and I'm recording. And then you will have until next Sunday evening to answer the questions and to give response posts to other students. One of the ways of doing it this way, one of the things with doing it this way is that we don't get the classroom interaction, so that's why I'll do shorter teaching time, but have more work on your end since we don't have class next week, but we will March 2nd. March 2nd will be the next time we meet. So this will give you time to work on it. Next week I am in San Diego working on my doctoral classes, so that's why we're not having class this week. But we just don't have enough time in our schedule to skip having class this week. So that's what we're doing. So let's go ahead and get started, and we'll go from there. We'll go ahead and open up with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for each student, each person that's watching this and participating in this class. I pray you continue to help us to grow as leaders, to grow as servants of you, and that we would ultimately understand your role for us in life and your purpose for us, so that we would glorify you in everything that we do. We believe you for great things in the lives of these students. Pray that you bless each one of them. In your precious name, amen. Amen. Oh, I'll apologize in advance if I sneeze, because this weather's been playing crazy havoc with me. All right, so let's go through our real quick, our core leadership beliefs as we talked about before. We've talked about the heart of the leader directly impacts his or her ability to lead. That's straight from the redemptive leadership model, talking about the importance of understanding that what's on the inside of you comes out and influences and impacts those that you come in contact with. So that's actually that second part. The heart of the leader sets the tone for the organization. So if you as a leader set a paranoid, scared, angry tone as an individual, that's going to affect the way your followers and employees experience that organization. The third part is that the organizational culture directly impacts the way people experience the organization. So the tone of the organization impacts the experience that people have with the organization, which ultimately affects that last part, which is the way people experience the organization directly impacts the organization's ability to fulfill its mission. So if people have a negative experience with your organization, you might have the greatest vision statement ever, but if you have bad leadership or poor connectivity with people, or you create this paranoid environment, it's going to really impact your ability to fulfill the mission that you believe God's given you. And in this context, when we're talking about church work especially, if you can't fulfill the mission that God's given you, then you can't really fulfill the call that God's given you. That's so important for us in an organization. So today what we're talking about is modeling the way. We talked a little bit about that last week, but I wanted to talk a little bit more in depth, talking about leading from vision, the dark side of leadership, which is a book that we previously used in this class that we've moved to Leaders Foundation that we'll still reference in this class, just because I think it's such an important part of leadership development. And then we'll talk about the economics of trust and how important that is. Understanding that, Kuzna and Posner, one of their key elements in their leadership belief is that as leaders, you must model the way. So you don't just get to tell people, do what I say, not what I do. You have to do it. And if you're not willing to do it, then ultimately you're going to inherit or create an organization that does not reflect what you want as a leader. So how long this takes will really be dependent upon how long I talk, since there's no response from you guys. So I'll try and not get too much off the bunny trail and try and stay on task. So we talked last week about leadership models, and we talked about the 5 elements of the redemptive leadership model. Those 5 pieces being competency, principle, character, transformation, and redemption. Each one of these building on each other. So competency basically says you know what to do. Principles, you know why to do it. Character is that element that is an internal quality. So the first 2, competency and principle, those deal with exterior factors. Character, transformation, and redemption, those deal with internal characters. And this, again, the heart of the leader directly impacts his or her ability to lead. So if the heart is corrupt, then you might have competency and good sense of principles, but if you don't have good character and you haven't been transformed by the renewing of the Holy Spirit, then ultimately it's not going to matter. You know, it's the example we used before was Hitler. Hitler got a lot of stuff done, but there was a morality that he lacked that prevented him from being what we would qualify as a good leader. So understanding that each one of those builds, and that the redemptive leadership model, leadership is influencing others to release their redemptive potential and fulfilling their purpose under God, which is that last element of redemption where it says, you as a redemptive leader are going to come back and help somebody else release their redemptive potential. And you're going to bring them up through the various elements of that redemptive model. So we've already talked about that. This is just kind of a recap of that. So redemptive model, it moves from the external and doing to the internal model of being. And it moves from task/accomplishments to purpose and meaning. So what that means is that when we first start out in ministry, when we first start in leadership, oftentimes we think about what we need to get done. As opposed to why are we doing it. And so that's so very important in our leadership. I've probably already shared this story, but it's the difference between knowing what to do and why you do it. I know I've shared this story, but it's the story about the ham. Husband and wife having a conversation about why the wife always cuts off the ends off the ham. And she says, well, that's what my mom always did because those parts are bad. And the husband said, well, I've never cut off the ends off the ham. My mom didn't do that. We've always eaten that part of the ham, so it's okay. So she said, well, my mom always did. So he calls grandma. Grandma's, or not mom, he calls his mother-in-law. His mother-in-law says, well, that's because those parts are bad. My mom always did, so I always cut those off. So he calls grandma. Says, grandma, why do you cut the ends off the ham? Your daughter says that they're bad. Your granddaughter says that they're bad. And she says, no, it's as big a pan as I had. So the difference between doing and being, or accomplishments and meaning, is understanding why you cut the ends off the ham as opposed to just doing it. So that's where we start applying purpose to what we do. You know, we contact people that attend church. Why? Because we want them to come back. Why do we want them to come back? We want them to come back because they mean something to God. So follow-up, very often do we look at, we very rarely look at that as a spiritual component, but it's even into how we steward money, how we care for materials that we're given. This is not our money that we're using here. This is, if we look at it from a doing model, I purchase things and I want to be a good steward of what I have because I don't want to run out of money. But if we look at it, the being element, which is that deeper element, which is the spiritual component side of things, we look at it and say, I don't want to spend this money frivolously, not so that I don't run out of it, but because this is the tithes that people have given to God. So that puts a whole different view on it, and that's so important for us as leaders to recognize. So that's the redemptive model. The other model that we've decided we're going to focus in on here is servant leadership. Jesus talking here, I've given you an example that you also should do just as I have done to you. Such a good reference for us to understand. Robert Greenleaf, I'm not going to read this to you, but it essentially talks about power in the new emerging leadership style is that power has to be granted. It can't be assumed based upon positional authority. The servant leader is servant first. Ultimately, if we look at it in the circle of life or the circle of leadership, you don't become a leader so that you can be in charge. You become a leader because you desire to serve others. That's a much different context of where we're going to be. And it means that your leadership's not going to be based upon power and authority. It's going to be based upon earned trust and respect through service. And so ultimately, we remember the Maxwell model, where that fourth level is that people follow you because of what you've done for them personally. A servant leader is going to approach that much quicker than an autocratic or paternalistic leader. This is, again, just another breakdown of the servant leadership. We've already talked about that. Servant leadership model first. One, you first serve. Two, heart for service is paired with an opportunity to lead. Servant leadership, we start in this assumption that it is the first among equals. So you're not the leader because you're the smartest, brightest, or best. You are the leader because you have served and you have been recognized in that position. So this is so very important in the context of how we lead, because it changes that position. It's that Matthew 20:28 that we've talked about, that we can't lead the way that society and cultures expect us to lead, where it's based upon position, power, or the ability to control others. Jesus, while obviously he had all authority under heaven, he still served his people. Did he share vision? Absolutely. Did he correct people when he needed to? Absolutely. But the example that he shares in Matthew 20:28 says, I serve you, unlike the Gentiles who they lord their authority and power over other people. So that's a mindset shift for us. So, and this is important as we talk about how we lead. And one of the ways that we model the way, as Kuzna and Posner talk about, is with vision. And so when we lead from vision, we have a few expectations that we have to understand. First of all, when we're leading from vision, that vision is a picture of the preferable future. And we'll talk about this in future classes as we talk about leading change. But you as a leader are the chief cultural architect. So you have to paint a picture of what you want the organization to be like. It doesn't mean that you are like that. It doesn't mean that everything has come to fruition, but this is where we're heading as an organization, is a very important part of leading from vision. It's a picture of the future that creates passion. So basically, you as the leader, you need to be excited and energetic about where you're going, and it's our expectations of a better tomorrow. It's like I said, you might not be where you're at right now, where you want to be, but if you've lost hope, then why would you have any expectation that your followers are going to follow you with energy? So here's some of the benefits of vision. It clarifies direction. It increases energy, it facilitates change, and it aligns resources, defines focus, enables leadership succession. I had a professor in my master's class, Dr. David Lim. He's actually taught at Bethel a couple times. He was in Singapore. He's approaching 70. He's been the pastor of his church 20 plus years, and he's got a successor, which is almost unheard of in the American church. We don't think of succession as something that happened. What we think of is I leave and the church goes a new direction. But there's a succession plan when the church is led from vision, understanding that God has called each organization to a specific duty in their local context. That vision can continue on past the leader, because that vision can be unique and creative for the individual church. So Dr. Lim, he's got a guy that's like 25 years younger than him. So it's funny, he referred to him as this young guy, and he's like 45, that is being raised up in the culture of the church. And when he's about 55, he'll probably take over the church, and Dr. Lim will step out. Why? Because they want to perpetuate the vision. So vision gives us the ability to determine what matters most to us as an organization and what doesn't matter. It's like a church I was on staff at in Brainerd, Minnesota. I had a gal come to me and she said, Pastor Spencer, I really think we need a children's choir. I really think we need a children's choir. And I said, well, that's a great idea. I'd love to sit down and talk with you about how you see that fitting with what we're doing and how you would like to lead it. And she looked at me and she goes, oh, I think we need a children's choir. I don't want to lead it. I don't have anything to do with it. Having a children's choir didn't have anything to do with my vision for the children's ministry. But I was able to kind of sway her off of that when she realized that she had to be involved in it. Because as we've talked about in so many times, if you don't have a clear definition of where you're going and what you want to do, if you don't have a plan, other people will have a plan for you. That's why you have to lead from vision, not necessarily from strength, but from vision. People don't want to be a part of something just because it's happening. They want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. So what that means is that you have to understand how to lead from vision, because it creates that picture that says this is what we could do. It helps you to align resources in the sense that you can say yes to the right things and no to the wrong things because you understand what God's leading you. So that's very important for us to understand. The process of vision, it's really a question on how you share vision. The authoritarian decree, basically Moses standing on high saying, this is where we're going. It doesn't work in the long term. The micromanaged vision, which is when you try and hold on to it. We'll talk later on about the process of facilitating change. And a lot of that's going to deal with communicating vision and releasing vision. And then creating a compelling vision, ultimately, if we talk about leading for vision, becomes the way that we really want to see this move forward. And the elements of that, compelling vision, it's discovered by the leader. So you as the leader, it's not that you're leading by democracy all the time when we talk about servant leadership, that first among equal, but because God does appoint leaders. I'm a firm believer in that. But it's discovered by the leader, and then it's affirmed by the team and enlivened by the organization. So if you look at Bob Beal's book, Master Planning, I believe is what it's called, he talks about, and then Aubrey Malphur's in Advanced Strategic Planning, talks about understanding that each local church or organization has a call that God has placed on them. And we are, as leaders, trying to join the current activity of God. Not necessarily direct the activity of God, but to join it. And each organization is going to have a unique culture and makeup. And this is where a lot of young leaders make a mistake, is that they come in and they try and blow something up. Brian Jarrett shared with us a few years ago when he was here for a Catalyst Unplugged. He shared about a church he was pastoring in Oklahoma, I think it was. And he had all of these things that he wanted to do. And in the midst of that conversation that he was having with God, God just asked him, said, are you willing to stick it out? Are you willing to stay here and implement this? And he realized as he was praying that he wasn't. And so he felt very clearly that God told him, then don't do a thing. Don't change anything. Don't blow up this church and then leave. And oftentimes leaders make that mistake. They're not willing to do the long-term work. They're not willing to do that hard work that requires them to go through difficult seasons, but also to affirm that it's not all about them. And that's what we're talking about here, compelling vision, when it's enlivened by the organization. That means that there's going to be an element of leadership in that organization that speaks into the vision beyond just what the individual leader does. And this is so very important to acknowledge the existing culture of where you're going into and where you're currently leading. So those kind of context really helps you to lead vision well, as opposed to just ramrod vision down people's throat. So leading from vision, leadership creates vision and strategies. Like I said, we're going to talk about a book called Leading Change. John Cotter has a 8-step change process. He's got a shorter version called Our Iceberg is Melting. This is important for us to understand in leadership. But leadership ultimately is going to create the vision and strategies. Management helps to create the how-tos. Plans and the budgets and stuff. So they're both important parts of leading from vision. Some people want to value leadership over management, but leadership without management is just really a lot of fluff, and management without leadership is just a bunch of paperwork. So understanding the balance of those two is important. And you as a leader are going to have an element of leadership and management within your own context. You can't have the expectation that you're not going to have to involve both elements of it. Communicating vision, you have to embody it early and often. And so this is why I wanted to include this in the conversation about modeling the way. You have to embody it. You can't just talk about it. You have to display it. You have to communicate it in every way. You can't say that we value people and then ignore those that are hurting. Tommy Barnett has a great story about when he first went to Phoenix First. It was actually shared from one of the staff members that was there when he first came. And he was coming into the church and he saw a homeless man in the general area of the church, and he stopped and talked to him. And the staff had lost him; they didn't know where he was at, and it was like his first week in the office. And Tommy Barnett's got this great heart for the lost and those that are in need and hurting, and so he had stopped and talked to this guy, and the staff member that was sharing this said, I realized at that point that this was going to be a different kind of church because of the pastor. And that's a way to communicate vision. You communicate it early and often. Again, in Cotter's book of Leading Change, he talks about the fact that we undercommunicate vision by a factor of 10. It's like the advertising campaign on a commercial. By the time it makes it to television, those that have seen it since the beginning, those at the ad agency, those in the organization, they're tired of seeing it. But by the first time it hits TV, it might have been around for 6 months. And so your consumer, they just saw it. And so if we think about it in the context of people attending your church, the average church attendance is every other week. So 26 times a year, people are going to come to church. So if you talk about vision once a month, you have a 25% chance of actually getting a chance to communicate vision to somebody. So think about that. Think about that. Early and often, big and small, all available means. If you're not communicating vision on a regular basis, what happens is a good portion of your church might never hear what the vision is for the church because they weren't there that one Sunday of that month. Vision needs to be more than just a catchy word on the wall or a great phrase on the wall. Vision needs to be lived out and led. So that's why it's so important to recognize it in modeling the way. Here's the leader's creed as we talk about the economy of trust. And this is important for us to recognize in modeling the way and in communicating vision. My most important asset is my credibility. Now, the heart of the leader directly impacts his or her ability to lead. But if people don't trust you, they're not going to follow you. It doesn't matter how compelling of a vision you share. It doesn't matter how incredible you communicate. If people don't trust you, they're not going to follow you. Imagine for those that were working for the Enron organization and those that are young enough, that are too young to know Enron. Man, people aren't going to, when you burn somebody that bad, they're not going to trust you. It's one of the biggest things that did in President Bush was when he said the reason that we went into Iraq was because of their weapons of mass destruction. And when they never found weapons of mass destruction, it just destroyed his credibility. And it made it very difficult for him to lead in any other way after that. So that's why credibility is so very important. And so that's where we talk about the economics of trust. Again, we're talking about modeling the way. This is all connected in the idea of we as leaders must be people worthy of being followed. That's just, there's just no way around that. We have to model the way. We have to be above reproach. We have to be those that others trust what you're going to do. So here's what happens in the economies of trust. When trust is low, costs go up and speed goes down. When trust is high, costs go down and speed goes up. So Dr. Wayne Lee, he's got this great analogy. He talks about chips. Every decision that you make costs you chips. Even if it's a popular decision, it's going to cost you chips. And so whether you're changing something or communicating something, every decision you make, it costs you chips. So if the trust is low, it's going to cost you more chips. And those chips you have to earn over a period of time. They don't just automatically show up. It's not like you just pass go and $200 showed up in your pocket playing Monopoly. You have to earn that trust. And if you have earned that trust, the cost of the chips, the number of chips it costs to make you a decision, it goes down. I've got a leader I'm very familiar with. It's got a high level of credibility. All those that follow him trust him. And he made a decision that was very, very unpopular. In the level of unpopularity of that decision has not actually been fully met out yet. So, but with the body of people that were disappointed with him, he was able to meet with him and say, I understand I did this wrong. I understand that you don't like this decision. But this is where we're at. and that body could have very well removed him as leader. But because of his credibility and their high level of trust they had in him, he was able to maintain his position. Now, it has cost him a bit, though. And you have to understand when you're making a decision, what's it going to cost you? What's it not going to cost you? Or what do you earn with this decision? Or what do you lose with this decision? And sometimes making a decision that costs you a lot of chips is worth it if it moves the organization forward. But again, if trust is high, you can get away with it. If trust is low, you don't get to go into debt with decisions. That's when you get splits and pushback and those horrible things that happen in churches. So there's the trust tax, the old thinking. It's success times experience equals results. And the new thinking is success times experience multiplied by trust equals results. It's more than just position. It's more than just energy and effort. It is also trust. You can be at some place for a long time, but if people don't trust you, they're not going to follow you. Just plain and simple. So the economics of trust affects us in a lot of ways. And here's the way that you can build trust. Basically, here's the first thing. DWYSYWD. Do what you say you will do. It's one of the commitments I make to our volunteers. We talk about the 4 cultures we're trying to create within our volunteer community. We want to be fun, fair, forgiving, and faithful. And basically, faithful means if I say that a meeting's going to start at 7 and end at 8, even if I'm not done, we're going to be done at 8. Why? Because I want my people to know that if I tell them I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. Just plain and simple. That's how it works. So you can undermine your own authority without ever meaning to by failing to follow through. If you tell a volunteer, hey, I'll call you on Monday, and you don't call them, what have you done? You've undermined your own authority. So don't make promises you can't keep. Don't make commitments you don't plan on following through. And don't tell people things just to please them. Make sure that what you're doing is what you intend on following through with. Do what you say you will do. So the trust building behaviors, talk straight. Don't beat around the bush. I'm not saying be rude. What I'm saying is be forthright and honest in your communication. Demonstrate respect. Create transparency. Right wrongs. So if you offend somebody, if you do something wrong, be willing to apologize. Show loyalty. That's not just for. Excuse me. That's not just for followers to leaders. You as a leader have to be willing to show loyalty to a volunteer. If your volunteer makes a mistake, don't automatically just throw them under the bus. Your pastor calls you and says, hey, what happened here? Well, you know, Sister so-and-so really messed up there. That's not going to work for you in the long term. What happens in that is that eventually people don't want to be with you because they don't trust you. Deliver results and then get better. You know, it's a perfectly valid answer when somebody asks you a question to tell them, I don't know. That's a perfectly valid answer. Or, I don't know, let me find out. That's one of the ways that you can get better. One of the ways that you can get yourself in trouble is by pretending that you know something you don't. People don't mind you not being perfect. Actually, they don't have the expectation that you're perfect. But people do mind when you pretend to be something you're not. And that will undermine your trust. So those are some of the initial ones. Those are the first 7. Here's 6 more things you can do to build trust. Confront reality. Don't be an ostrich and stick your head in the sand. Too many people pretend like everything's okay, and it's really not. Clarify expectations. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Practice accountability, not just for your volunteers, but for yourself. Who holds you accountable? Do you have somebody that's going to hold you accountable, somebody that's going to help you be responsible for what you're doing? Listen first. That goes back to Stephen Covey's principle, seek first to understand, then to be understood. That's a powerful leadership principle, because too often in conversations, what we want to do is we're just waiting for our turn to talk. We're waiting for our chance to say the great thing that we have to say, but that doesn't really necessarily help you engage in conversation with people. Keep commitment. That's already do what you say you're going to do, and then extend trust. If you function as a paranoid individual, and if you communicate to people that they are not worthy of your trust, they're going to distrust you also. They want to know why you're so paranoid. And that's an important thing for you to recognize as a leader. Building trust, 3 of the things that you need. You need clarity. You need to understand why something is important. Intensity. So intensity means that you need that consistent focus. That consistent focus on team building, a consistent focus on honesty, that consistent focus on those 13 things that we talked about that helps to move the organization forward. And then unity. This goes back to where we're talking about leading in vision, that you need to be able to incorporate in the elements of the organization along with the trust factor that you have, and help people to get along together. So when we talk about like the 4 examples I talked about for the children's ministry culture that we're trying to build here, fun, fair, forgiving, and faithful, that forgiving element was an important one for us, for not just from followers to leader, but from follower to follower, because we had an environment here that was very, it was septic. The children's ministry, the elementary ministry didn't trust the preschool ministry, and the preschool ministry didn't like the nursery ministry, and the nursery ministry didn't like the other. So it was just this environment that says, I don't trust you, I don't like you, we're not going to get along, and it made it impossible for the organization, the children's ministry organization here, to get along and to do anything. So we would plan events, and I'd bring the team together, and they would literally look at each other and say, yeah, well, this is what we're going to do in elementary. I don't know what preschool's doing. And they would treat them like it was a whole separate church. It's impossible to have trust and unity in that context. So one of the things that we had to address here was to be letting go of past hurts, but also to be sharing grace to one another, because you never know what somebody has walked through that day or that morning that is going to make it impossible for them to show up on time, or maybe they have a hard time following through on their commitments that day. These are things that we need to recognize as followers, that trust has to be built on unity. You know, Patrick Lencioni, talking about the 5 dysfunctions of the team, the first dysfunction he talks about is the absence of trust. And he's not talking about necessarily honesty, but it's I don't trust that you're going to get your job done. I don't trust that you have my best interest in mind. I don't trust that you are looking out for the organization. You see that trust thing that built in, and it prevents unity. It prevents unity. So trust is absolutely essential. Absolutely essential to all of the other things that you have to do. And the absence of trust makes it impossible for you to lead or build a team. So here's 6 practices that you can do to build trust. First thing you need to do is discover yourself. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. But how well do you know yourself? How well have you examined your leadership motivations? Do you understand why you do what you do? Do you understand how what you do affects other people? That's an important question. Appreciate constituents. If you're not willing to recognize the contribution, if it's always about you or what you've done or what you've accomplished, eventually people aren't going to want to be a part of that. Affirm, share values. That again goes back to modeling the way, in that you've taken into account the organization's existing culture and the new cultures you're bringing in there. Develop capacity. So remember, we talked to Redemptive Leader about helping people move from competency to principle to character. When you're developing capacity, what you're doing is you're helping people to grow in their own ability, serve a purpose. So if you're developing capacity and serving a purpose as a servant leader, what are you doing? You're putting other people's needs ahead of your own. And that is a keynote of a servant leader with redemptive qualities, that you're helping people to move forward. Then we want to sustain hope. And that goes, again, leading from vision, helping people to see the preferable future and see, listen, if you can't look at your team in the face and say, hey, we can do this, then you need to evaluate your own leadership. Now, we talked about credibility being the core of leadership. Credibility and leadership, here's the thing we understand. Character counts. Individuals act. Organizations create culture. So what that means is that that's why the unity of trust is so very important, because it helps you to create a position where individuals can work together in concert to create an organizational culture that affirms itself and affirms the values of the leader. The system has to be based on trust, and leadership is relational. I taught a lesson not too long ago with a bunch of children's ministry volunteers talking about the reciprocal nature of leadership. Leaders need to build relationship, but followers have to give back relationship. If a leader gives, and followers just receive, then ultimately the leader is going to burn out. But if there's always the expectation that the follower is going to come to the place that the leader's at, it's going to have that same result. Followers will eventually burn out. So as a leader, you must build on relationship. And now that first part we talked about knowing yourself on that last slide, discover yourself. This is an important part for modeling the way. And what I want to conclude, we're going to talk. We've already talked about the developmental process, and we've been talking about 40 minutes here, about 37 minutes. And I want to conclude running through an element of the developmental process that I think is so very important for us as leaders and growing. We already talked about the developmental process a bit, but I want to emphasize this in talking about the dark side of leadership. So the developmental process, we've already talked about this, but it doesn't hurt to reiterate things. Pentecostals and charismatics that traditionally have emphasized the dramatic event over and against the process. So we always want the Damascus Road experience as opposed to the gradual changing. The question that we need to ask is, can it be both and rather than either or? I think it can. And can moments build momentum in the developmental process? So we talked about the crucible moments of change. So you have something happen here, it either causes you to move down or up, and that's when the transformation happens, is at those crucible moments. So if we can string a series of positive things together, it gives us the opportunity to grow as leaders, and that's that developmental process. Robert Clinton, we've already talked about this. You guys finished reading his book, The 5 Elements, The Sovereign Foundation, Inner Life Growth, Ministry Maturing, Life Meaning, and Convergence. I think you guys have a good understanding of that. I haven't finished grading your papers, but I will have them graded before your next one's due. But this is a great one of understanding the developmental process. We referenced Janet Hagberg's critical journey, and her developmental process has 7 stages. It's the recognition of God, which is essentially salvation, and the first parts of the Christian life, the life of discipleship, which is the developing time when you're getting into the Word of God, you're being discipled, obviously. The productive life. Now, we cover this more in depth in the Leaders Foundation class, which is the follow-up to this one. You can find it on YouTube. Honestly, I've got a 10-class video series on this if you really are interested in it right now, or you can just wait until we get to it at that time. The productive life is that third phase. It deals with working in ministry. That journey inward is this where you're getting to know yourself. It's that reflective process that says, I'm working on the me part, and I'm learning about how God has created me and shaped me. And then the wall is a developmental experience of your will meeting God's will. And ultimately, subsequently giving God his position that he deserves in your life. And then the journey outward is similar to the productive life in the fact that working happens again. The motivation is different. We don't necessarily need to go into that. And then the life of love, that's the 6th or 7th, however you want to look at it, stage, which basically you are reflecting Christ back. You're reflecting Christ out in all that you do. Again, no one starts there, and it's a developmental process. We've got some biblical texts that we're not going to look at today, but if you want to see some scriptures that pertain to the developmental process, these are good ones here. What I want to spend the next few minutes about is talking about the dark side of leadership. And really, when we talk about overcoming the dark side of leadership, what we're talking about is those qualities in you as a personality and a person that inhibit or enhance your leadership. And oftentimes, until you've been willing to reflect on these, you're so very unaware of them. So what I want to do is walk through these a little bit And then there's a question at the end of this that goes along with that that will help you think through this, and you guys will talk about it together even without reading the book, and that's okay. So the first one, the developmental process and your dark side. The first dark side of leadership they talk about is the compulsive leader, and the biblical example of that was Moses. Status conscious, reassurance and approval from authority, tries to keep control and keep order, excessively moralistic, their heart is angry, rebellious attitude, may be repressed. So a compulsive leader, work is their life. Work is their life. It's where they thrive. It's it's that joke that work is my hobby. It's and they're defined by their job. So and they're very concerned about position. They're very concerned about power and authority. A lot of compulsive leaders are actually very insecure because they don't have a recognition of where they're at, and they don't understand. They have this perspective that says, in order to be in charge, I must be in control. Excessively moralistic, so legalistic. Everything's rule based in a compulsive leader. I have to watch this because I can have the tendency to be a compulsive leader. Actually, on the Overcoming the Dark Side of Leadership test, I come out as a compulsive and narcissistic leader. So most of my issues are myself. Have very little to do with other people. But insecurity is a big part of the compulsive leader because they need that maintaining control. So as you look at it, we can start looking at this. This starts talking about your motivation for doing things. Why do you do the things that you do? Why is this important? So understand that's the first one, the compulsive leader. The second one in the book is the narcissistic leader. The biblical example of this is Solomon, driven by the need for admiration and acclaim. So they want the pats on the back. They want somebody to tell them, you're doing a great job, you're amazing. Wow, I could never do that like you. This right here, that position makes it almost impossible to lead as a redemptive leader, and it makes it almost impossible to lead as a servant leader. Overinflated sense of importance, great ambitions and grand fantasies. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with ambition. The problem becomes in motivation. Why do you want something more? Why do you want bigger? Why do you want better? Is it for the glory of God, to grow the kingdom, or is it for your own self-gratification? Questions to be asked. The heart of this leader is self-absorbed due to inferiority, may not enjoy success due to dissatisfaction. Success is never enough. There is never enough. The only way to feel happy in this sense is to have more success, more victory. And the ways that you can make yourself feel better in this context is you can either tear other people down or build yourself up. And it's really all about self-promotion. And this is a hard place to be, especially as a leader, is because it makes it very hard for you to build a team. If you have a team member come to you and tell you, I don't feel as though you have my best interest in mind, you failed as a leader. You've missed an opportunity because your team should know that you are for them. If they don't think you're for them, they think you're for yourself, then they're not going to want to serve alongside you because they think you're just going to take advantage of them when you can. The next leader, this is not me. So I like I said, I lean towards compulsive and narcissistic, more compulsive than narcissistic, but I'm willing to acknowledge I have a narcissistic side. The paranoid leader is not me. Biblical example is Saul. Like he wanted to kill David because David had greater accolades. People loved him more. They're suspicious. They're hostile. They're fearful. They're jealous. They're attached subjective meaning to motives. So the paranoid leader, what they're going to do is they're going to read something into every action that you do. So you might think it was totally benign. You didn't mean anything behind it. And they're going to look for, okay, so why did you say that when you said it the way you said it? Paranoid leaders become very difficult. Their heart, strong feelings of insecurity and lack of confidence. There's always positive sides, but the negative sides of these things also, they can affect the way you build relationships. So if you're paranoid, you're going to try and avoid relationships. You're going to try and avoid giving people an opportunity to get to know you. What you're going to try and do on your very, very best is to keep everybody at arm's length, so that way you don't have to worry about whether or not they're going to betray you or treat you wrong or do something like that. So understand that a paranoid leader creates that paranoid environment that makes it very hard. It's very hostile, very hostile. Whereas a compulsive leader will drive people to work and might burn them out in that way. And a narcissistic leader might devalue people because they want all the accolades themselves. A paranoid leader makes it a hostile environment because you feel like there's always something going on. The next one is the codependent leader. Your biblical example is Samson. Samson with Delilah, obviously he was an idiot, and he needed her recognition. Peacemakers who cover up problems. They're benevolent with high tolerance for deviant behavior. So what does that mean? It means they let people get away with stuff. Why? Because, you know, if I hurt that person's feeling, they might leave me. That creates a problem. They react rather than act. So instead of being proactive on fixing things, what a codependent leader is going to do is that they are going to, when it finally blows up, I'll deal with it then. And more oftentimes they react as opposed to head things off before they become repressed and frustrated, struggles with giving full, honest expression to emotions and problems. Codependent leaders are hard. It's hard for them to lead because they need people. And then Maxwell's got that old axiom: if you need people, you can't lead people. And I think that's really true. If you're worried about pleasing everybody, that doesn't mean you're looking for opportunities to make everybody mad. But if you need people, you can't lead them that way. And then the last one is the passive-aggressive leader. Jonah is a great example. Stubborn, forgetful, intentionally inefficient, complains and resists demands, dawdles to control, short outbursts of anger and sadness. Their heart is anger and bitterness, as well as a fear of success. So the passive-aggressive leader, oftentimes what they will do is they'll agree with you to your face, and then as soon as you're gone, it's out the window. Or they'll agree with you to your face, and then they'll go around to the rest of that team and go, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? What do you think about this? Oh, I don't think we should do that. I think we should do it this way. And they'll never address anything directly. They run away from problems until they can't avoid it anymore. They run from confrontation. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to do that. Oh, yeah, it just slipped my mind. And they're squirmy. They're squirmy, yeah. They're difficult to nail down to stuff. It's like trying to nail snot to a wall. They're very hard to confirm that they have done what they said, or that they're being honest with you and upfront. Passive-aggressive leaders are very hard for me to deal with. My personality, I'm a very forthright and upfront person. So when somebody's passive-aggressive, it becomes very hard for me to trust them in the long run. So in redeeming our dark side, here's the thing that we need to do. You need to acknowledge where your weaknesses are. Acknowledge your dark side. Examine the past. Resist the poison of expectations. So what does that mean? That means that oftentimes our motivations behind doing things are because of what other people expect of us. So we need to understand what God has called us to do, which is that last part: understand your identity in Christ. Practice progressive self-knowledge. Give yourself an allowance to grow and recognize where you have grown. And don't necessarily always assume that you are in a negative place, in a negative position. So these are some important things. I think one of the biggest things that you can do as a leader on the overcoming the dark side is to understand that you have a dark side. It might be multifaceted, it might have many nuances to it, but ultimately you have negative aspects of your personality and your character that need God's redemption in them. And short of Him redeeming you, they're going to constantly be problems for you. So let me encourage you to understand these things and then to begin addressing them. So that's actually our first forum that I want you guys to talk about, or not talk about, to post about. The first forum, here's what you're going to do. I want you to answer these three questions. These three questions, okay? I want a total of 250 to 300 words on your forum post. And so you'll have to refer back to the notes here, in which online you'll see the PowerPoint's been uploaded also. It says, what is your dark side? So it might be a combination. Like I said, I'm compulsive and narcissistic. What events in your past have contributed to your dark side? So what developmental challenges have caused you to be paranoid? What developmental challenges have caused you to be codependent? What spiritual disciplines do you need to place in your life to help redeem your dark side? So whether it's accountability, whether it's additional scripture reading, what's something that you need to do? It don't have to be long answers, but I want you to do an initial post at 250 to 300 words, and then I want you to respond to 2 other students' posts. Now, for those that are taking in the online class, obviously there's only 1 person in the online class, so you don't have to respond to anybody. But for those that are in the on-campus class, you need to respond to 2 other students' posts, and those responses need to be at least 100 words apiece, and they'll give you a chance to interact with them. So here's the great thing in the discussion about the dark side. If you can name it, you can steward it. So what that means is that if you can understand your struggles and the challenges that you face as a leader and the negative aspects of your personality, you have the opportunity to address it and help fix it, which is so essential. Again, remember, we're talking about modeling the way as a leader, and the role of a redemptive leader is to help share your redemptive story to move somebody up. So if you can understand these things about yourself, you can come through that redemption and share how God has delivered you victoriously from negative aspects of your personality and your life, and that will help provide transformation for somebody else. So if you can name it and identify it, you can steward it. Such an important aspect for us to recognize as a leader. So the first forum post that you need to do is answering these questions here. What's your dark side? What events contribute to your past? Have contributed to your dark side? What spiritual disciplines do you need to place in your life to help redeem your dark side? The second forum post that you need to have is basically answering just a reflection on the conversation, and I'll post the questions in that one that says it's essentially what was new information to you, what stood out to you. That response should be 250 to 300 words. I don't necessarily need you to respond to other students' posts in that. And then the last forum post, so we'll have 3. The third post will basically just be an integrity check, honesty check that says, yes, I did watch this entire video. It's 53 minutes long at this point. So I want you to, in that third post, to say, yes, I watched the entire video. I'll give this little caveat here. I post these on YouTube, and the reason I do that is it lets me see how long videos have been watched. So please just be honest with me. Yes, I watched the whole video. Boom. I'm not going to post the question. I'm actually just going to put on there, answer the last question that I asked you, and that last question is, did you watch the entire video? Okay, so I'll see you back in class on March 2nd. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, spencer.click@bcva.edu, or you can do it through Advanced 360. I will try and get this posted as soon as I can, and I look forward to seeing you guys. Thanks.